I think most of you guys have been here before, but I'm really especially happy to welcome these guys here. This is an exhibition that we've been talking about for probably about a year, and we had no idea what to expect, other than that it would be excellent and over the top, amazing visually. So let me introduce Patrick and Patrick, and we'll start there. They are the collaborative team of artists called FAILE, and we're just going to get the first thing out of the way right away, which is the two Patrick thing. Also, McNeil and Miller, so two Patrick M's, have been collaborating since they were teenagers. And so let's get that out of the way with the first question. How did you guys meet? Was it like a seating arrangement or something where it was alphabetical order and you both had the exact same initials? And
yeah, it was first day of high school. I just moved there from Canada, and they were calling attendance, and I wasn't on the roster yet. They kept going Patrick and with the M, and I go to raise my hand and I go Miller, and I go like this. And it happened like 3 times, and the third time we were in gym class together, and he raised his hand next to me, and I was like, oh, they've been calling your name all day, and I keep thinking it's going to be me. I was like, I'm Patrick, and that's how we became friends first day of high school. We also both have Uncle Jims. Yes. And his dad's name is Michael, and my dad's middle name is Michael. There's a lot of funny crossovers along the way,
but we also, shared the same art teacher through high school, along with 2 others here, and who was really great. So it was nice to share that time together through high school and have a lot of the same kind of trading sketchbooks in different classes and things. Yeah, it was a really fun time. Really great art.
so were you both art-centric in high school?
I think so. Yeah, I think that was both of where our strengths lied was more in art.
Yeah, we were into it. It was like the thing we would do.
Yeah.
We'd get in history class, start like a drawing of a head, and then pass it over, and he'd like finish the body.
Wow.
Things like that.
That's amazing. So what was the first, I guess those were the first types of collaborations you did, but what was the first, would you say, professional art collaboration that you did?
Well, I guess I should say, because this came up a few times last night, but I think we always liked the idea of the way a band maybe makes music, and thinking about art and making art that way, where we're kind of both bringing something to it, and it's kind of better for both of us bringing that to that. So while I was in art school in Minneapolis, Patrick was in art school in New York, and we would fly back and forth and just kind of take over the print labs, and ink was free, and we could just kind of crush and make a lot of big prints, big mono prints and things like that. And it kind of evolved from that. And I think as we were making those more and more, that was really when Patrick, living in New York, was really getting excited about the things that were happening on the street. And that's really where we started to kind of think maybe we should formalize this under a name and start with a project on the street.
Let's talk about the name, actually, the original name, and how the name morphed into FAILE that it is today.
So initially the name was Alife, A-L-I-F-E, with the idea that giving a life to a new project and the artwork on the street having a life. One day it was there, the next it was not. And we were getting ready to put up our first series of prints on the street, and I had a roommate, and she was like, there's a store on the Lower East Side called Alife, you should go check it out. And went in and introduced ourselves, and they were kind of like the first kind of, I guess, urban art type kind of shop. They sold graffiti stuff and did art exhibitions and stuff in there. And I met one of the guys named Tony there, who was one of the owners of it. And he's like, you're welcome to go put up the stuff. He's like, but it's going to look like advertising for the shop. And so we started looking at the word Alife and making anagrams, and we got file A, LP, and fail. And we kind of looked at the word fail, and we're like, oh, this is kind of interesting. It's taking something negative and making something positive from it, or you need to risk failure to have a life. And we're like, oh, this is kind of interesting. So the word switched very early on from Alife to fail. That's how we did that.
So the earliest work was pasted to walls in the streets,
Mhm.
walls and buildings in the streets.
Stencils and posters, yeah.
And that type of work, its lifespan, it was ephemeral, right? It would change. One sort of leading question is, were you drawn to certain types of surfaces to put your works on? Like the crumblier, the better, the more pristine, the better, with color, without color?
Yeah, I think we were drawn to like the wabi-sabi of it, like the deterioration, how weather played an effect on it, how people played an effect on it, and just, you walk by it one day and see it as one way, and then walk by it a week later and it would change, and there was something kind of special about the art form in that way. There was no preciousness about it, and you kind of let it go. You didn't ever become attached to it. You kind of embraced the destruction and like the new life that things would take on through years. Sometimes it would last a day, sometimes it might last like 2 years and stay there. And the areas that we were drawn to were usually like, weird alleyways, doorways where there was lots of layering and things, old advertising malls where there would be all these layers of paper and posters and things like that. In New York, these areas were very abundant when we first moved to New York. These areas don't really exist so much, at least in Manhattan anymore. So it was definitely a different time, a different feeling on the street than it is today. You can still find those places, but they're harder to find. Big cities, a lot of gentrification and cleaning up.
How did you feel when other people would collaborate with the work you would put on the street? People you didn't know?
It was, as long as something wasn't getting torn down right away, it was a big part of it. We were always going back and photographing the work. Something would get torn, we'd photograph it, bring it back into the work. So there was always that kind of symbiotic relationship that was happening between the things that were happening on the street and things that were happening in the studio. And that's kind of always been a part of our work, some of these pieces started as photographs from the street, like that My Life There was a big piece we did in Paris, and then brought that back into it again as a painting and reworked over it, through quilt making and kind of, it's a lot of transformative processes from the way we're collaging imagery. There's a lot of different slides here, I recognize it, but we're just sort of letting them play. But I think it was always about embracing a lot of that serendipity that was happening.
I never really felt too precious about the work on the street, and I think that was kind of like a lesson that I learned from working on the street, is just not being precious about things, and then also the actions of how you work on the street and gestures and things that you would do, because you'd be looking out for people or police and doing things very quickly, and like sometimes not even looking at the gesture. And then when you go back in the studio and work on things, it would inform a much looser approach to how you work on the work, and less preciousness, which I always enjoyed.
And the imagery, the layering of imagery, you mentioned, particularly in this quilt piece, but all of the imagery that we see in here kind of recurs throughout your work over the decades, right?
Mm-hmm.
So how do you tend to recycle like your earliest imagery? Are you always adding new imagery to the accumulation and then continually like revisiting certain images as people would like look at photographs?
Yeah, they're really like icons in our world. And I think a lot of our images are about that kind of, like inspired by iconography, by the hero's journey, by whether it's a movie poster or a video game, poster, or an old religious icon. It's very much about like those characters. And people that collect our work or know our work or photograph our work, they got to know those characters on the street over the years. And it became like a real touch point for them. They really want that one particular image or this and that. And we probably have 300 images at this point. Usually every show there's a theme and we're developing things around that. And then they'll come together in these sort of patchworks, like they happen on the street. You're putting up multiple ones. sort of continues to tell different stories. And I think that's very much coming from New York City and just being bombarded by imagery all the time and language and typography, and it's kind of like at the end of the day you're trying to make sense of it all. I think our collages are very much about that kind of these little bits and pieces coming together to tell those stories and to try to make meaning from all these different touch points that we're inspired by.
So when you had the earliest street art, like pasting posters and prints onto walls, that was kind of like the original layer. And if you look at, we were having a conversation about how you felt that each great leap forward you made in your work happened sculpturally. And I was thinking about that conversation, preparing for this talk and thinking, wow, were the buildings and the walls that you were collaborating with in New York City, I mean, those were really sculptural. It was really a three-dimensional situation, and you were collaborating with that structure as well.
Yeah, you can never take the architecture out of art, I think, in those early years. And I think as we've done bigger murals and responded to buildings on a much larger scale, it's still a similar idea. It's still taking those elements of form and kind of going extreme. But then I also think, sacred spaces are something that have always been really important to us, and that connection point to sacred spaces and to sacred architecture and those things have also been a big part of our work. And whether that's the temple that we created here in Portugal, like a total pop-up that people were looking in their Go Lisbon books thinking this is all about that, to this is all marble, all mosaic inlays, these ceramic prayer wheels that you could spin. I mean, this lived for a month in this plaza in Portugal. I mean, all ceramic, metalwork. It's very much about kind of creating this whole new mythology for this moment and giving people that kind of experience of wonder and sort of turning some of those icons on their head. Or whether it's the Deluxe Flux arcade, and like responding back to arcades as a child and how that felt like a sacred space, and like the artwork on the cabinetry and the music and the kind of weird seedy characters and the lighting very much felt sacred as a teenager. And I think we've always tried to create those types of spaces, or whether it's an alleyway in the city or a giant prayer wheel in Times Square. We've always been playing with that like, what do we pray for in a modern society? And how do we take those kind of icons and that language and that imagery and try to repurpose it in a way that makes meaning out of the world today?
And Deluxe Flux. Talk a little bit while we're seeing these images about Deluxe Flux, what it is, where it is, because probably a lot of people here don't know about it, but it's amazing.
Yeah, I'll pause it there just for a minute. In 2010, we did a collaboration with the artist Bast at a gallery in London, and we were really talking about those ideas, about kind of like, we knew we wanted to create this installation, and we were talking about these kind of, I guess, again, those like sacred spaces of our youth, and I think a pinball machine came up and then an arcade, and so we found a bunch of old arcade cabinets, totally gutted them, cleaned them out, and then repainted all the cabinets. We made all our own video games, all music, everything for them, our own tokens. These were the spaces. There was always an arcade room in the front and then a black light room in the back. So it was really just diving into that world and making something that was really transformative, I think, for people. That the games were always, in the beginning at least, they were non-objective, so they were like art games where you were kind of bringing the art to life. Eventually, people like objective. People like doing this, we found. But it was really treating arcade cabinet like a sculptural object and applying those surfaces. And then that's grown into much larger spaces. Now we have 2 nightclubs, one in Detroit and one in New York City, where these are ongoing spaces. We've done really big pop-ups, almost concert level. This one was with Swizz Beatz in New York City, and brought some of the characters to life and other things. But it's been a really fun extension of the work to kind of bring it to life in a new way.
It was the first, I think, art show we've done where people came in and you could feel like this joy and laughter in the space where, it was much different than the typical art opening where people were standing around having a drink, talking about the work. It was like you could feel this visceral feeling where like, oh, this is different. This feels really good. And when we do pop-up, we tried it again on the Lower East Side. We opened one for 2 weeks, and it was amazing to see like the kids coming in after school to hang out in the arcade and play in it and recreating that energy again. So there was really something special about the energy that was created there that I think still resonates when we try and create shows and bring that some joy and happiness and try and keep that energy going.
Yeah, I think something about this show that I think we both really responded to is that this feels like it captured a little bit of like the Deluxe Flux world to us without being, it's hyper saturated and that, and it's really nice to have those moments where you feel like you've kind of brought that enveloping kind of sense of the imagery in the world to life in a new way.
Yeah. And the idea of experience in your work, you've talked about, like in our conversations, we've been talking about how your work really asks to interact with the viewer, whether it is a game console or a joystick. These guys just did a big collaboration with Herman Miller, or the prayer wheels that you spin, or dancing in the nightclub, that sort of thing, or kind of looking for the temple, like what is this, researching it in the guidebooks. There's always like an active participation in your work that I find to be very different from artists who just like do a painting, and put it on the wall. Then the space you kind of have to meet in the middle, right? Because the picture plane is doing what the artist made, but the viewer themselves is thinking about the work, absorbing it, right? But in the case of sculpture, you're not often encouraged to touch it and spin it and like all of that. So I feel like you're doing something that's really different from the way that most artists present their work, and that it's something that's needed right now in our society, to engage people who look at art in a way where they can imagine that it actually is for them too, not like the sacred space is in the artwork and the artist is the God figure that creates it and they absorb it in the same way they would absorb religion. In this way, what you're doing is saying, like, let's experience this awe and wonder of life, all the layers of it together equally.
Well, it's in our DNA. I mean, we are a collaboration. So we always sort of have to stop, the individual stops at a certain point. He's going to do one thing, I'm going to respond to it. It's always been this volley. And then I think working on the street became an extension of that, where again, like, people would put things over it, tear things, and all of a sudden you'd respond to that. So play, I think, has always been, the cornerstone of the work, and that kind of relationship to each other and to the viewer and to, just this sort of like letting the viewer be a part of the process. That's where like the puzzle block pieces around the corner, those started as little puzzle blocks because we really wanted people to have that same experience that we were having as we build these modular wood paintings. And it was really that idea of like, how do we let our viewers have that experience to manipulate the work and to make their own little stories and their own little abstractions. And it's always been like those where, it's like, okay, this is where it stops. This is like where we see a resting point, or giving the viewer the opportunity to be a part of that and create from the worlds that we're playing in.
I think also growing up as a kid, that idea of like, you go in a museum or an art gallery and it's always, don't touch the art. And I was just like, that always kind of bugged me because I always want to touch the paint a bit. Yeah, it's nice to break that rule a bit.
And then sort of the last thing I wanted to talk about is the idea of experience and layering. Like the way that we layer the years of our lives, one on top of the other, and certain things like seep through to the next year, certain things don't. It seems like in your work, there is that kind of maturity where every time you see an image that's been used like from 20 years ago, last year, whatever, mixed with something new from this current year, it gives it a feeling of memory and the layering that we all experience too as we grow up from being children who are playing with it, reading comic books, playing with video games, whatever. That's all there, just like it is in our own bodies and memories. And so, and as well as the texture, there's soft texture, there's slick texture, there are pieces of your own clothing, right, from various stages in life in these works, pieces from different countries where you've traveled, right? So can you say a little bit about how the transition to the quilt with that layered imagery and layered memory made this show come into being?
Maybe might both have different ideas of how that came to it. I'll say just this out of the we came here in December of last year to visit the spaces, and we had just started while we'd been inspired by quilts for quite some time. We had just started with kind of doing some quilts, and we knew that was maybe a direction we wanted to go down. But after viewing the space, I was driving back to Arizona, and it was just that big blue, expansive sky, and I was seeing these little puffs of clouds all of a sudden materialize and either turn into this bigger cloud or wisp away as another cloud, and I was just so fascinated by the idea of memory and will I be remembered, and what happens to these little bits and pieces of time. And I was just thinking how similar it is to the street and to being in the city, and these kind of posters that come up for a minute and then they're gone, and this idea of memory, and then how that related to quilt making, and how all these different bits of fabrics that were used over time come together to tell a story, and how those ideas of memory are live and then die. And that's where A Ride of Existence title came from, this just kind of calamitous, brief moment in time where you sort of are alive, and then, then from there on it's sort of a memory of it. And the quilt making was such a great way to capture all those things that we do in our work and to respond and reflect, and it just seemed like a really great jumping off point, which really did lead to diving deep into the quilting and then ultimately this work. At least that was my experience with it. I guess I mean there's ways we came to it formally, which are always different than conceptually, and between Patrick and I, Patrick's much more of a doer. The thought isn't always the thought maybe will follow the action, whereas for me, the thought always precedes the action. And I think it's a nice balance for us both to kind of keep the wheel moving, and he'll do something and then I'll start thinking about it and add into it, and usually mock it up. And then maybe we'll make that thing, and he'll. It's kind of that wheel of how we work. But as far as memory, you can see how many things keep continuing to be recycled in the work.
This is very much a show of memory. I feel like there weren't a lot of new images made for this show specifically. It was really a showdown of memory lane in a way through quilts, which are really a lot about memory. Historically, taking old pieces of fabric or T-shirts or textiles that you grew up with, and then reshaping them into this functional piece that has warmth and a sense of memory in different ways and new contexts.
So do you guys have anything else you want to add before we open it up to questions?
Yeah. If people have questions, I think it's a good place to maybe just jump off.
Okay.
I love the idea of some other person rolling up to something that we've done years ago and do something else or Did you ever run into any of those folks? Like, were there places where you would bump into each other? Because there were a lot of people doing that kind of mission, you know?
I mean, that was the original collaboration with a good friend, Mike, who we started the arcade project with, was working on the street anonymously and seeing each other's work. And you'd put something up, and then you'd go back and you'd see something he added. And there was a collaboration that probably happened for a good 6 months until we finally met each other. And that formed a friendship that lasted years. And we
That was fast.
Yeah.
And did you know what his name was? Or
Bast.
was it just this dude Bast? And-
No, actually, it was going back to that store of life and going in and saying, "Hey, do you know anyone that knows this artist Bass?" That place was a really funny area where a lot of artists kind of converge. So if you needed to find somebody, you could usually find them through them, and that's how we initially met. And same thing with Swoon. We worked with before. It's just collaborating on the street. A lot of it was just collaborating on the street anonymously through the years. You'd be in London and see a piece of theirs, or Tokyo or wherever, and you would riff off of each other's bits here and there, and then you'd meet them, and they would know you, and you would know them, and that's there was a kind of a secret level.
It's really extraordinary. It's so kind of village.
Yeah,
in
totally.
a way, right? It's
Yeah.
very petite.
Yeah, it was a small community
Yeah.
in the beginning. That was really fun.
So it wasn't like you knew each other, like you met at a party or something, and like, oh, I'm a street artist too.
No.
It's like, wow, you actually you collaborated with each other before
Yeah.
you,
We
okay.
met. Yeah.
And there was a lot of anonymity at that time.
Yeah.
Just when people were on the street, you really had to be careful.
Did you be arrested?
Yeah, for so many years.
And it was just part of the culture to keep your identity secret for a long time. I mean, that's kind of the beginning. So.
Did you ever get arrested?
Yeah.
Many times? Did you have to go to jail?
What was it, my goodness? Question though, because with graffiti a lot of times the whole thing was topping each other's stuff and this battle, but it sounds like you're talking about collaboration. So
It was
there's actually
different.
this inclination to help bring out more from your stuff with their stuff.
Yeah, early street art culture was different than graffiti culture. It wasn't.
Territory.
You would also have crews in graffiti where you'd have several writers in one clique that would go against other writers or try and get up or over. And with street art, it was usually the individual. So, and it wasn't, maybe you don't like a piece and you might put something over their thing.
Which was never a great idea. Those pieces usually wouldn't last.
But Mike had no problem with that. If he didn't like something, he would just put a poster over it. So, that was life. So.
That's cool.
What's the 1986?
Want that one?
Sure, I'll do that one. So 1986, related to the Space Shuttle Challenger disaster, when we were first creating images in the beginning, some images like the dog image we would create so that it could be seen from far away, like on a billboard, like you can see it from blocks away. Graphic, simple, iconic. Images like the boy with the bunny there would be more like a thought-provoking, like what's the boy doing with the rabbit, and that would spark the conversation between two friends walking down the street and seeing it. With the Space Shuttle Challenger, we were trying to think about icons that could maybe spark a memory, and we were talking about how the Space Shuttle Challenger was a formative kind of moment in our life. Growing up in school, watching it explode, you could really draw a memory of where you were at that moment when you saw it happen, first teacher in space, and then we were like, oh, that's an interesting idea that you could create an image that could take you back to a personal memory. So that's where the 1986 came from. And longer story was when we left college, we had no access to the silkscreen facility, the remake screen. So there were images that were on our silk screens that we would continue to reuse and reuse. And the 1986 was on one of the screens, and we repeated that number a lot. And then when we started signing making prints and signing them, we would sign them to FAILE, and a friend would date it, so we just write 1986 when everything was dated in 1986. And the 1986 in a funny way became kind of a sub-moniker for fail. You need to risk failure to succeed. And that was kind of like the challenger, you know, they were risking failure to succeed. Yeah. Good job. Thanks.
That's awesome. Anybody else?
You mentioned that there are some people who shared a teacher with you, is that right? And this
Our good friend Rob here we went to high school together, and I studied in college with Brenda here.
how did you come to be here? You traveled here, or
I live here.
you live here? And I want a story from Rob. Like, tell what were they like? Were they total weirdos?
Actually, I'll tell a quick story about Rob. Rob was much more culturally interesting than at least I was, and I think you were. And like when it came to music in New York City and art, Keith Haring, all that stuff. Rob was really like our introduction to that in high school, and we're grateful for that. Which was really fantastic, and also a great artist himself. So it was we would always be kind of bouncing things off each other and having fun.
Rob, what's your tale? Like, what do you think of these guys?
What's that?
Tell us a story of that.
Yeah, well, you know, I mean, they've got over most of the talking points. I mean, I think, we were in that class, and I was like mentioned, Marcy Warner was our teacher. She was a really great influence on a lot of students, and, especially these days when schools are taking away arts programs and stuff like that. Like, she had not only I think an impression on us, but many other classes through there. She was really a neat lady. But yeah, it was just we would get in class and we'd sit at the table there and we'd just all draw and talk and we exchange ideas and sketchbooks and I remember I took Pat out for his first time in New York City. He went to go look at he had applied to the School of Visual Arts SVA and so he wanted to go check it out and he'd never been. I'd been a few times over there. I was with him. We got to fly in and got in there kind of late and got a cab and we had a room at the YMCA and we were staying there and first thing that happened, we got in the cab at the airport and then we got in an accident.
Yeah, first cab ride.
First cab ride, and the cab driver gets out and starts yelling and the other guy starts yelling, they get in a fight. We just jump out of the cab like, we'll walk from here. It's kind of fun with, I think both of these guys, like in the beginning, they're different schools and I would go see them like I do now. They're some of my best friends. Travel to see each other and I'd go see Pat in New York, stay there, and we'd do some work at his place. I'd see Pat in Minneapolis and we'd hit up that screen print studio a ton. We'd be there late nights and making projects, but it's and it's fun to bounce ideas and see where I see where these guys get ideas sometimes years before they come out. So it's neat to be kind of an insider in some of that process.
So Rob, where did you first access street art information? I mean, there wasn't
my uncle
is
is an artist. My uncle's he paints Russian icons. He lives here in Albuquerque. He used to be the priest at Rancho de Taos, and he is he spent time in New York City in the 80s, teaching at Pratt, and he knew a lot of those guys, like Keith Haring, class guy. They would hang out in some of the same circles and artist circles, and I think Keith Haring was one that probably maybe he's like our all-star. Like his work was just so approachable and again on the street and Futura. So I really learned about that kind of stuff from my uncle, and I was just fascinated because he was kind of in that scene, going to Studio 54 stuff like that. He taught me all about it, and I just really gravitated to it. And then art class, I think we just kind of it just seemed right, the music and the culture. And
You talk about the band, and I think that was kind of one of your original ideas, was the idea of a band.
Yeah.
Art collaborative.
And what was your name?
I'm Brenda.
Are you surprised that your friends are like crashing into Santa Fe and like doing this crazy thing, or?
No, Santa Fe is like a weird place, so
Yeah.
that makes sense.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But like this, it seems like their trajectory kind of, right? Like they're kind of just zinging around the world, doing all this crazy stuff. Has that been fun to watch?
Yeah.
Are you an artist?
No. We're not anymore.
Brenda is a very talented designer, and yeah, we were really fortunate at the Minneapolis College of Art and Design to have just an incredible crew. Honestly, kind of a similar situation where just a lot of good friends, a lot of ideas bouncing around, and it was a really great time. And a lot of those people went to New York, and we've worked. In
Looked
fact,
at the Lux Arcade.
yeah, the programmers for that were our great friends at Renda's, and so we were always kind of like, I got this idea. Oh, I know somebody, and then that bounced to that. And, it's been a really wonderful kind of little community in that way. Yeah.
I'm so curious though, like you two are sort of in like a marriage, kind of.
Definitely.
You're in a business partnership. You're both artists. First of all, I'm curious, what is the nature of your disagreements? Like, how does that go? And second of all, do you have a sense of like where your sensibilities end
Totally.
and where the other one begins?
No, definitely. I mean, we're very familiar with each other's strengths and weaknesses. Arguments?
I think what we've learned is that we are both aiming for the same feeling. Like we both want to get to the same place. We might have different ways of thinking about how to get there, but I think we always remember like you want this as much as I want. You want to feel that excitement as much as I want to feel that excitement. And if the other person is that passionate about it, we've been working together for a long, long time, and it's kind of like maybe I'll get the next one, and or things that maybe I don't like something, but we do it, and then it ends up being really like popular for other people, and it's kind of like, oh, I guess I didn't see what he was seeing, and that's just part of any relationship is kind of finding that line. And there's a lot of respect and friendship there over time. Funny enough, I feel like building things is what we argue about the most. like these, we went back and forth a lot, and bicker about like, no, we should use this zip tie or like do that. Yeah. But it's these are the things we laugh at over time. It's we feel very. I think we feel very blessed to be able to like share this journey together. And I mean, I couldn't imagine doing it alone. Like to carry the weight of the successes and the disappointments and the highs and lows of a creative journey. It's really hard, and to be able to share that with somebody is really nice.
I guess dovetailing with that a little bit is you were alluding earlier about you have one kind of approach we do with like planning things out and then like testing them. That's kind of more my world, especially with the film stuff. And then you're more kind of just dive in. I'm kind of curious what your processes are then, like when do you just kind of have the toy box and start playing with stuff and then kind of seeing an idea arrive, or do you kind of like go in with the concept and all right, we're going to make something fit this concept, or I'm just curious how everyone's process is interesting to hear, whatever that is. I'm just curious what yours is.
I feel like it's kind of process driven, and whatever's percolating at the moment and presented as an opportunity in front of us, we kind of look around and see what's been percolating in the process and be like, oh, okay, let's take these and like follow the flow and just see where that path leads, kind of thing.
We would not have made this. It was in a way solving a problem. Like we knew this was a really big open space with a lot of height. It was like, how are we gonna, captivate people and bring this space to life? Which parlayed off of these kind of packing blankets that Pat had been experimenting with while, just in the studio. And then it was kind of along with this fashion collaboration that we were doing, and it just kind of all came together in the right way at the right time to ultimately become what we were sort of referring to as columns, and this idea of like the kind of softness of quilt making, but like the weightiness of the architecture and supporting space and things like this. So it's just that kind of, again, like there's the opportunity to have the show, then what was happening in the studio at the time, and then kind of those things.
So would you say that you work more in projects, like a project is an entity and that's, let's start thinking about what we want to do? Or do you guys have time to noodle?
The noodling is always happening.
Okay.
Yeah, the noodling is the secret sauce. Without the noodling, the ideas don't. You make stuff and you're like, I don't know what this is for, but then like 6 months later, some opportunity comes up and you're like, oh, that's what that was for. Right. Yeah. You have to have those noodles.
Yeah, we're not showing it, but like the Herman Miller project making the joysticks, when we opened Deluxe Flux in Detroit, we had this idea to make hand carved bar tabs, of these little characters, these little drawings, and they were great. They were really nice, like this big, and like cool bar tabs for all the drinks that were on tap. And then when Herman Miller approached us about creating a series of art collectible objects, we were just like, wow, it'd be really fun to bring those
There's
to
a gaming
life.
division.
Yeah, and it was a part of the gaming, and it was just like it was like, okay, it's close, but the idea wasn't complete. And Pat was like, what if we call them joysticks? And it was like, oh, all of a sudden, like the circle was complete from the arcade language they were coming from. There was kind of a funny idea about them being taps for drinks, and then there's how they would live as like these little objects and putting them on little steel stands, and so it's like sometimes the opportunity creates the idea, and I think this was an example of that as well.
There's one more follow-up that I kind of thought about. So with that in mind, with all the noodling, how often do you basically go down a path, chew on something, you're working it, like talking about the joysticks, and you get to the end, you're like, how often do you fail? How often do you like, that didn't work, all right.
I don't
Scrap
know.
that.
I feel like we've got a pretty good sense now of like how those things may work or not work, and we're able to move through that quicker. Sometimes things don't land exactly like you think they might, and we work fast. We're pretty prolific, and sometimes maybe like things don't, things could develop a little longer or further, but it's time to shine, and you kind of are making it happen. So, I guess it's kind of that constant like balancing act of those things.
Nothing's so precious. You're making so much, you can be like, okay, not that, this, right? Like,
Yeah, I don't know. It's like the pieces upstairs, we made those 20 years ago, those pieces of paper. And like, we've been kind of waiting for like the right opportunity to use those like wood. They're all like made from wood. And this was kind of like that time where all of a sudden it seemed like this is really relating to the way the blankets are and the stencils are, and obviously to like working on the street. And it just like it completed a part of the show that spoke to each other, that those pieces have just been waiting, the wings for a long time. So yeah, it's one foot in front of the other, and eventually, like a path will appear.
How much of those pieces is 2008? Like what bits?
All the wood.
The wood backgrounds.
Yeah. We've just been saving it for like the right time to kind of. It's one of the master printers at Pace Prints printed those with us, also into MCAD, and good friend, and yeah, they were just so nice and yummy as backgrounds.
We were working on this series of paintings for a show. When was that show? Like 2 years ago? Three. And a lot of it involved a lot of stencil cutting to make the paintings. And you use the stencil once to make the painting, but the stencils were kind of nice. There was like nice bits and bobs in them. And then it was like, how can we kind of reuse those stencils into like a new process? And then the stenciling started happening on top of those paper from the leftover bits from the other paintings. So you can kind of recontextualize those graphics from the paintings into like a new context. And it just became that exploration. So
When we were talking about Rexford the other day, he did a lot of that. He cut a shape, but then he would also use the bit that he cut. Yeah. And they found their way in there. Did the shape. Beautiful. And Papel Picado, comes from the stencils in China for export. But then the stencils were left, and then they made their way to Mexico as packing, and then they turned it into their own thing.
right.
That's a kind of a nice,
Yeah.
parallel.
Yeah, that's what I love about that process, is that journey of like making, and then that unintended thing that like presents itself later in another way. Like, oh, find like new meaning and new applications just through the process.
Any other questions? You guys can always ask as you have a glass of wine, longer run, and talk to these guys too.
Brenda, you made it good.
I know, but then they answer my question. Can I ask one more question? Because I think people might be be interested in. It's something I hadn't ever asked you guys and thought that it might be interesting for people to know. When you talk about the anonymity of like being a street artist early on, because we've represented a lot of artists who've had shows here actually have had to be anonymous. You know, Callie at one point, Nadia Tolokonikova for a different reason, or actually kind of, she was a street artist, I guess, for street performance. And you guys, and now so many of you guys aren't anonymous anymore. So what was it that made that shift? You know, I mean, there are only like a couple people who are street artists now who really still are anonymous. But the rest of you guys, what was it that made you just start using your names and stop being anonymous?
I think we were probably working on the street less at that point. There were more institution situations coming up where it just became more of a challenge to stay anonymous because you know there were interviews or things happening and you just it just didn't seem like a necessity anymore to be anonymous.
It was our names. I mean, we'd done the Tate Modern by that point. You know, like it just felt like then it was just us hiding our faces. We'd be doing interviews, but it'd be like it just felt a little goofy. I don't know. And yeah, I think that was just shifting from working in galleries and I just maybe the goals had changed a little bit. A lot of things we've done on the street, I think we were maybe felt like we had kind of reached a point where it was like not the most important thing. And also, you know, it was like I don't think it's in here, but like you know, Pat would go out and put the prayer wheels in, and it was the whole you know like he'd have the safety vest on. He'd be out there with a hammer drill for 45 minutes putting this, you know, big thing in the street, and there weren't, you know, it was like you could kind of get away with it from that level. And it wasn't like we were going around just like taking over property and, you know, like being destructive. Yeah. It was pretty thoughtful, and I think we were putting out some like really interesting pieces at the time. So it didn't feel like that was as much of a risk, or at least not for me, because he was doing it.
And you weren't asking permission, you were just doing it.
Just for getting it fun.
Yeah.
And no one came up and said, excuse me, sir, what are you doing with that hammer drill? They just assumed that you belonged there?
Yeah, lots of pylons,
Oh, yeah. Props.
vests, and
Good props.
yeah.
The semiotics red
Constructions,
is
like big, loud kind of
Yeah.
construction
Working man.
looking
You get in character a little bit, like
Okay.
you belong there. You're
Yeah,
kinda-
had police drive right by.
Yeah.
And then we caught the first guy, the first one we did, we didn't engineer very well, and we caught the first guy stealing it. We walked up while he was stealing it, and we're like, hey man, you know, what are you doing? And he was like, oh, and all of a sudden it was kind of awkward and, you know, a little confrontational for a minute, and then we talked him into like, no, you're not gonna take this, and so he wheeled it back to the studio, and we spent about a half an hour talking about better ways to engineer it and how he got it out of the ground, and from there, we really did rework them, and they lasted much longer. Then people figured it out.
I'm intrigued with the installation you did in Lisbon and how that would go over in a city like Santa Fe where tourists are here coming to see historical monuments.
Oh, I know, I would
I mean,
love
somewhere out in the desert, you know,
Yeah.
coming along with an
Yeah,
installation.
maybe that's the next project.
Yes, it'd be so
Yeah.
fascinating.
That would be fun.
It would be so cool.
Those are special moments to kind of like
I know.
just stand back and watch.
To watch people.
And what happened to that temple anyway?
Right now, it's been shown in a few museums and things. I think it maybe has one more build in it. So we're it started in Lisbon, and we're talking about letting it live forever just outside of Lisbon. But
It looks like it's made out of really sturdy materials. It's not like foam. It
It
looks
does,
like
yeah, it looks
ceramic. It's all real
The
steel, right?
roof is foam.
That's
The
the
roof
only
we
part.
had to do like we did because we were trying to figure out like when we're building it, like how are we gonna light it? We might have be on a grid, and we're like thinking about like the posters and how they ripped, and then we were like, why don't we just like break the roof open on it like a ruin, and then that lets the natural light in. And so where it was broken on the roof, it was like Disneyland. We like
Yeah.
foam and rocks, and it looks like it's real mortar and whatever, but it
So that way it'd be safe, right? Because it's lightweight.
This is the only part that, you know, the roof here and then you see around the back, but I mean, everything else is steel and stone, ceramic, tile.
Yeah, there was Portuguese boat builders that built the interior frame of it, and they use like massive 4x12 like wood framing. It's like insanely heavy.
This was the area that it was.
Yeah. Yeah, this was actually all rock, but as you got up taller where it overhung, that was all kind of lightweight material, so that it would kind of.
It's really cool how you use the vernacular of, it looks like it totally looks like it belongs there, but the way the ceramic is like,
Yeah.
and the tile work, but yet it still hasn't modern, it still looks like something different. I
We
don't know.
did a lot of research,
It's
and
really
we were
cool.
really inspired. And,
Yeah.
it was,
We went to Lisbon and explored all the government buildings and figured out where it was going to go, and then tried to like blend it in with like the pinks that they chose for the government buildings and the tiles
Palette, yeah.
and the floors that they do in Lisbon, and really put a lot of work into all the tiles we did research on. They're all done traditionally in like wood oven kilns, so that you get like all the irregularity and the colors and the glazes and stuff. All the tiles were hand painted on the bottom, so we were really trying to like find like hand done craft, nothing being done like machine wise. Yeah, all this tile stuff actually led to like I think a lot of the wood block stuff, and then a whole bunch of other tile projects that we've done where we've done big kind of tile tapestry kind of installations.
Yet at the same time, it almost looks like a bad bitmap, you know, like a computer like that goes between the two.
yeah,
Well, this happened
It's a lot of the
in
idea.
Lisbon, because they would have tiles that were done like maybe 200 or 300 years ago, and then they couldn't find the replacement tile, so they would try and find a tile that was as close to it as possible, and you start to get this tapestry, and again going back to the quilt making and piecing kind of thing happening. So all these things kind of stir and leading to the next.
Well, thanks, you guys.
Yeah.
Oh, sorry, go ahead.
No, it's all right.
Feel free to ask these guys questions as you walk around, go upstairs, get some refreshments, and thank you so much.
Yeah,
How long
thanks,
will the
everyone.
show be up?
This show is gonna be up through February 8th or 9th, I can't remember which date that
Alright,
is. Yeah, and then parts of it will go on to the Fort Wayne Museum. And then hopefully other parts will go to other museums and just keep traveling. That's our goal with what we're doing here, is to try to give curators enough time to come and see the work and experience it and make it as easy as possible with no loan fees, and do whatever we can to help them show work that we believe is so incredibly important in our society right now.
Awesome.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks.
Thanks for coming.
Nice to meet you.
John, well, how's the art going? I met you a little while ago. I forgot your name.
Dory.
Dory, pleasure.
Thanks.
Boy, business is slow. I haven't worked since April. I got a show starting in about on the 25th. So Brian Cranston lead on it. It's gonna be fun. No budget. I mean, really bad budget for some weird reason. So it's gonna be a tough one in terms of condensed timeline and not a lot of money. Oh well, they used to. I used to work in the department, but I do graphics now. I'm in the graphic art department, so I'm making. But I'll definitely. It turns out that they're looking for something particular. It's good to know an ace in the hole of people that have locals that know stuff that's not on the radar. These location departments, they develop a pretty good Rolodex over the years, but you never know. I mean, I worked on a show where I did graphics. Yeah, no,
you're putting up the sign on
so there's two graphic design. I mean, there's like marketing graphics, and that'd be someone making stuff for, you know, when it's all said and done. But I'm the guy making graphics for the set decoration. So we got like we'll have like a scene maybe in a bar